Charlie, you are an holistic gut health coach who has helped over 500 women heal their gut. What inspired you to take an holistic approach to healing and health?
Yeah, so it was really inspired through my own journey, my own health challenges, my own health failures. So just to kind of backtrack a little bit, when I was 18, I started going to the gym. I started to take a pre-workout at the time that was quite popular that ended up being banned because it had amphetamines. And that kind of correlated with my mental health really struggling. So I went and saw a doctor and I was prescribed antidepressants and I took those for 3 years. And I was quite grey in that time. I probably wasn't as aware of how much I was struggling with my health and my mental health. But then I decided at one point that I wanted to come off the antidepressants. And then my health really started to spiral, I suppose. And I started to experience terrible anxiety, worse depression, but then also, physical things as well. So panic attacks, heart palpitations, insomnia. I also had these gut issues like bloating and gas. And then I was also really struggling with energy. I got a really bad case of glandular fever, which led me to be misprescribed antibiotics. I had an allergic reaction to that. And then once I recovered from that, I was having to take cold and flus basically every day just to get through my work days. So I was very much at rock bottom at one point where I essentially didn't know who I was anymore. I had all these symptoms. And when I went to the doctor, they would just tell me that everything was normal and they would recommend another anti-anxiety medication. And I really didn't want to go down that path. So I started to see a psychologist and I saw a psychologist for 3 years and that helped me a lot as well. But then I was still having these physical health problems and I started to get a bit of an awareness around gut health. I was a personal trainer at the time and I was looking into these things a little bit, but I was a bit lost. I was a bit confused. I was a bit overwhelmed. And in hindsight, I didn't really know anything, to be honest. And I came across this practitioner who was doing blood analysis and specialized in gut health. So I just thought, may as well go see him, see what he says. And then he kind of introduced me to this world of gut health and showed me that I had, severe damage to my gut lining. I had imbalances in my microbiome and kind of explained how that was probably linking to the symptoms I was experiencing. So I started going into this protocol that he recommended and I started to see all these changes with my mental health, my mental clarity, my mood, my energy, my digestive symptoms. It took time. It took a few months, but it was like an awakening for me because I had been helping people with just their physical health, like weight loss and muscle gain. But then I realized how much of an impact this can have on your overall well-being. And I was even getting better results in the gym because of it. So then I was like, all right, I need to integrate this with my clients. So I got a mentor and we started helping my clients from a more holistic approach. And that's when I really started to get into it, went down the rabbit hole. This was probably 4 or 5 years ago. And yeah, it was exactly that. I remember because I was actually in quarantine in COVID because I was in Bali during COVID and I came back to Australia at the start of 2021. I had to quarantine in the hotel for a couple of weeks. That's when I started that. And ever since then, I've just been really passionate about gut health. I've realized how much that there is to know. And I've also realized how misunderstood it is. And on top of that, it's becoming, unfortunately, more and more common. More people are experiencing these challenges. It's getting worse, if anything, as a whole. And people are becoming more aware of it, which is great. But there's a lot of confusion there. So that's really what's led me down. It's been kind of a gradual transition from exercise science and personal training into this more holistic approach in functional medicine and gut health. And yes, it's been inspired by my own challenges and my own struggles, essentially.
Wow, I've got goosebumps. That was incredible. COVID was such an amazing time for so many people because whilst in the midst of it, it felt like the world was ending. A lot of people came out really embodied in their new trajectory of life.
Mm.
For sure. So, what's your go to system and framework for gut healing?
Yeah, so this is something that we do quite differently to a lot of naturopaths, specifically even functional doctors, even obviously conventional doctors don't really have much of a framework, right? So for example, if you go and see a doctor with gut issues, they're generally going to tell you that you have IBS. And that's going to be basically the label, the diagnosis per se. But at the end of the day, IBS is just a collection of symptoms and there's got to be something causing that. So we go a bit deeper first off and try and identify what that root cause can be. And this is just IBS. Like obviously there's a lot of different things that can be associated with gut health. But if we're just talking about the standard bloating, constipation, gas, diarrhea, digestive pain, nausea, like this is essentially, if you have that, you fit the criteria for IBS. So we use functional blood analysis first off to kind of look into someone as a whole and see, okay, these are what we can see in your blood markers, and this is what you could be pointing towards, the patterns and the correlations, and this can give insights around what someone might need. And the reason why I love that is because it's accessible and it's also cost effective. But I guess the caveat there is like what I've been studying for the last, years, I don't exactly know, is like the differences between the normal ranges that doctors use, the conventional ranges, and then what's actually optimal and what's actually healthy. Because essentially, if you go to the doctor, and I got told this multiple times, right? I go to the doctor, I felt terrible, and they would say, your bloods are normal. They're perfect, actually. And I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense because I feel terrible. So then I realized that those normal conventional ranges are based off just the normal average population that gets tested. So with the population as a whole being quite unhealthy, and generally the healthiest people don't get their bloods tested that often, this is what creates that normal range. And it's just a comparison to that. So being normal doesn't necessarily mean optimal, right? You're normal compared to a sick population. And then a lot of the time, doctors are also really just trained in looking for disease and then treating the disease rather than being like, all right, this is the trajectory that you're on, a preventative approach, or also how can you optimize your health, right, to feel better, not just have the absence of disease. So that was a bit of a tangent, but
I love it.
that's where we start with clients to help pinpoint that and take the guesswork out of it, because what works for one person may not work very well for another person, might actually make them worse. And then we've got two hierarchies that we kind of think about as a framework for gut health. The first one being that you want to take a top-down approach. So this is where there's like a hierarchy and an order essentially that you need to address things in. And it's called top down because it starts at the top. And if someone's listening to this and they're visualizing like what is top down, you just got to think about your body, and starting at the top, what's at the top? It's the mind, right? So that's your nervous system, that's your stress. They're probably the two biggest things, honestly, and it can even go deeper than that, whether it's past trauma and things as well. Addressing that, supporting that, and there's a lot of different things that can be going on there. And then coming down to the way that you actually interact with food. Once you swallow food, you don't have any control over that. Yeah, that's in your digestive system's hands. But before that, you have what's called the cephalic phase. And that's how you, essentially this is facilitated by the vagus nerve. So when you see food, when you smell food, and the state that your nervous system's in when you're eating, this influences all these other functions downstream, like your stomach acid production, like your saliva production, like your bile function, and your gut motility. So then you kind of see how I'm moving down. So I move from the mind down into the mouth, and then we got the stomach, and then we got the small intestine, and then we got the large intestine. So what's important to understand is like probiotics and fiber and prebiotics, these are really focused on just the large intestine, the gut microbiome, which is really important. But if you haven't addressed this hierarchy prior to that, so your nervous system, your mental health, your stomach acid, your eating practices, your small intestinal health, so your gut lining, and also then coming into the large intestine, then you may potentially be missing something. So I think that's really important to understand. And then you can work through that by addressing and supporting and healing those elements, right? So this is where we kind of have our 4-stage approach. I don't know if I'm getting a bit technical for you. Still with me?
I'm really with you. I'm all over it.
Yeah, amazing. So this is where essentially stage 1, the first thing you want to really do is focus on the foundations, but then also focus on repairing the gut lining and supporting nutrient deficiencies, reducing inflammation. Then once you do that, you're setting yourself up really well. You're going to feel better, but also you're going to increase the likelihood that you're going to be successful with rebalancing your microbiome. So it's very common that people will have an imbalance, with their bacteria, whether it's a small intestinal. So this could be something like SIBO. This could be something like H. pylori. This could be parasites, this could be candida, or it could just be an imbalance, in the actual microbiome. So then you can do what's called rebalancing. And then from there, you obviously got to restore the microbiome, right? You've got to bring up the beneficial bacteria. You've got to heal the gut lining further to kind of tie it all together and create a sustainable long-term approach so you don't relapse. And that's where stage 4 is more around maintenance. So if you go through those 4 stages, then you're going to have a much higher rate of success, whereas a lot of people or practitioners are just focusing on one thing, right? It's like, you have this infection, let's kill that. Or you have low beneficial bacteria, we have to bring them up. But you have to address all of them. Otherwise, you're missing one of those elements. And that's why a lot of people don't get results, or they don't see the results they'd like to see, or most likely they relapse in the future. Their results are short-lived.
I
So
love it.
I know that got a bit technical, but hopefully that helps kind of shine a little bit of light on it for some people.
Absolutely. So there's a few things that you brought up in there that I really want to dive into. So what's the first thing people need to address then with dealing with the gut issues? Is that the mind?
A lot of the time it can be, but we also have to understand that it's a two-way relationship because the gut and the brain are always in communication via the vagus nerve that I said before, that gut to brain axis. So what's going on in the gut can definitely influence your mental health. So for me, like the example that I gave before, where I saw a psychologist and it helped me, but then it didn't take me all the way because my gut was still so imbalanced. So a lot of the time you do want to take kind of a holistic approach, and it will depend on the person and depend on what is the highest priority. Because, and this is where I'm going a little bit off track here, but just for example, antidepressants can actually play a role because they can help you get out of that depressed state to then take the actions that you need to get better. Whereas like if you're just depressed, then it's very hard to actually go and do the things you need to do, like get sunlight, like eat healthy food, exercise, sleep better. So you have to kind of treat, like the frameworks that I talked about before are helpful, but it always comes down to the individual as well. But to answer your question, yes, I think that that is a huge thing. So if there are things you can do to support your mental health and your nervous system, whether that's simply just breathing properly, whether that's meditation, whether it's getting out in nature more, or maybe it's something that's really dysregulating your nervous system, like a bad relationship or a bad job, then you might need to make some changes there. Otherwise, it's going to be hard going to get better. On the flip side of that, obviously, if you do that, then you're still going to have to probably rectify your gut health and support that, and that's going to help you feel even better. So I think some basic changes around diet, around, potentially supplementation, but that's usually the next step. Like you'd start with the foundations first and know exactly what you need. Otherwise, just guessing with supplements is kind of a waste of time and money. And then I think eating practices as well. A lot of people just do this wrong, and it's so easy. It's just easy in theory, simple in theory, but hard to implement, which is simply just slowing down, chewing your food more, eating a relaxed state. Don't eat when you're stressed at work or scrolling and things like that. That will also be free and easy to start with, and then you can go from there. So you don't want to overwhelm yourself, but you also need to understand that everything ties in together. And that's where I believe in a holistic approach rather than this specialist segmented approach where you see a dermatologist for your skin. You might see an endocrinologist for your hormones. You might see a gynecologist for your, endometriosis or PCOS, things like that. Like you're seeing all these different specialists who are segmenting into one area, and they're just focusing on that rather than taking a holistic approach. So that's why it's important to think about all of those factors: diet, lifestyle, nervous system, environment, supplementation, digestion. There's one more: movement, of course. Yeah, so they're probably the big ones.
Yeah, right. And really, like when you listed all of those places, people you could go see, if you really just took the holistic approach and considered the body as a whole, all of those issues should start to heal themselves, because the holistic world does teach you that the body is made to heal itself. It just needs supporting to do so.
Yes, and exactly. And there's nuance to that as well. And there are obviously real diseases that need specific supports. And I'm not trying to knock on medicine, it has its place, but also we just need to take this kind of multifaceted, complementary approach, right? Like the medical system is very limited without healthy lifestyle, and healthy lifestyle can only take you so far if you do have a chronic condition. So I totally agree with that, definitely. And I think, like I said before, it's just every individual needs their own individual approach.
You've answered another question that I had a little bit later on, but I'm actually just going to get into it now. Something that I've been dealing with, being a mum, I've got little kids, is, and over the last few years, I've been on my own health journey, quite similar to yours, but we won't get into that now. But what I've actually noticed in the last few years is that I judge all foods. It's kind of like I know it's like my nervous system, my subconscious. I look at all food and I'm like, is it bad or good? Because social media particularly is like everything's good and everything's bad. So I'm right now, I've acknowledged it, and I'm having huge conversations with like my partner and my good friends about it, because I've actually noticed it's actually become quite toxic. And obviously now I've got kids, and you see how other people feed their kids and how you feed your kid, and then you're like, you want to be a cruisy mum, but you also want to raise really healthy kids. Like, what would you say for me and other mums listening who also feel like they just don't know what to feed their kids or eat themselves when everything is bad?
Yeah, that's a really good point you brought up. And it is a massive trend that I'm noticing, especially with social media and especially with people becoming more conscious of their health. What we have to recognize is that with social media is that it's going to be the content that is going to be the most polarizing, that is going to get the most engagement. So if I go on social media and say that X is bad, let's say I say gluten is bad, dairy is bad, we have a negative bias. So we're going to kind of be drawn to the negative more so. But there's always nuance to that. But with social media, it's not really set up to support nuance. So this is where a lot of this fear is coming from, because any piece of content that you say, any piece of content that you make that is polarizing and negative is going to go better in the algorithm, and that's going to get more reach. Whereas if I go on and say, like, for some people, gluten may have this effect, but for others, it might be fine, or whatever example you want to give, then that's not really going to go that well because it's nuanced. So this is where a lot of this fear is coming from, I think, personally. That's what I've noticed. Coming back to your question around what to do, as I said before, it's an individual approach to a degree, right? So this is where it's really important to understand as well, is people want that one size fits all. They want to know that the carnivore diet's the best diet. They want to know that vegan diet's the best diet. They want this one diet is the best that everyone can follow. And again, there's bias here where the outliers are going to rise to the top. So if someone does get full symptom resolution from following one of these diets, they're going to be outspoken about it, and that's going to get attention. Whereas what about the other percentage of people that didn't get results from it or just only got a moderate response? So that's where, again, we have to understand nuance and that there is no one size fits all. But I think that just coming back to foundations, like coming back to a whole food diet, is going to be a great place to start. Yeah. If you're just looking at single ingredient foods and you're thinking about quality, which I think is underrated, because the other big kind of black and white polarizing conversation is calories, which is something that we're moving away from a little bit, is that calories are all that matters, and calories are the most important thing for your health. And it doesn't really take into consideration quality of food. So is the food, for example, is it organic? Is it grass-fed? Is it processed? Is it not? These kind of things matter a lot. So if you can focus on quality food, you can focus on whole foods, generally you're going to be pretty good. You're going to be pretty well off. I don't think that we can answer it any better than that unless we kind of look at, scientific evidence to see what kind of points towards the best. But again, there's obviously limitations and flaws and bias to that sometimes as well. So, I think the best thing you can do is work on your relationship to food, right? And that's what it sounds like you're kind of coming to, is like, it's not really so much about the food itself, but it can be about your interaction with it and your relationship with it and what you believe about it. Because if you believe that everything is going to be bad and destroying your health, then it will. But if you are not really so focused on that, then, or you don't even know, then it may not have that same effect. And there's even research to back that up. So, that would be my very nuanced podcast style advice that I'm sure will get 0 clicks on social media, but hopefully the right person who needs to hear that does.
Yeah, I'm sure it's going to land for a lot of people in my community. So anyway, seed oils, what are they and what's your thoughts on them?
Hot topic, super hot topic.
Yeah.
So seed oils, it's a bit of a misleading word first off, because there's all different types of seed oils. Yeah. So, and quality matters a lot here as well. So if we look at the research on seed oil specifically, so these are going to be things that essentially these are polyunsaturated fatty acids. These are generally in the research not that damning, right? It's not that bad. When you're comparing it to things like, for example, saturated fats, there may even be health improvements there. But we have to go a layer deeper when it comes to seed oils and look at which oils are we specifically talking about, and what was the methodologies used in those studies, and how reliable is it. So that was a bit of a side tangent, but for example, I saw a study recently which was comparing plant oils to saturated fats, butter specifically, and it was saying that essentially that the plant oils were going to be more health promoting than the butter. But if we go a bit deeper, then they were categorizing all of the oils within the same basket. So canola oil, vegetable oil, and olive oil were all in the same conversation. So it wasn't really deciphering between the differences. So this is where the quality matters a lot, right? Because there's a huge difference between olive oil and between something like sunflower oil, vegetable oil, and canola oil. And if we go a layer deeper, there's quality to that as well between, for example, cold pressed sunflower oil and highly oxidized unstable, industrialized sunflower oil, that's been repetitively heated in a deep fryer, or it's been sitting on the shelves for a long period of time. Because these oils can be a bit more prone to oxidization, and this is when it can essentially cause that inflammation. So I think there's a lot of nuance to understand with this. I don't want to demonize all seed oils, because there are going to be some seed oils, like if we look into things like, for example, cold pressed black seed oil, or we look into things like cold pressed flaxseed oil, sesame seed oil, like these things may not be too bad, but when you're heating them over and over again, or you're putting them in ultra processed foods, which is the big thing here, right? The biggest place you're going to find seed oils is going to be in ultra processed foods. So then avoiding some of these may actually be helpful, but it's just hard to differentiate whether or not that is the seed oil itself or if it's just a reduction in ultra processed foods. So again, nuance there. Seed oils have got a lot of bad hype, and I think a lot of it's valid, because one of the biggest things here is the omega-6 content. So again, we need omega-6. I'm not trying to demonize omega-6, but the thing is, like, if we have too much omega-6, then this can imbalance the omega-3 to 6 ratio. And throughout evolution and some kind of some populations, it's estimated they had an omega-3 to 6 ratio of between 1 to 1 and maybe 1 to 5. Probably 1 to 3 is probably a pretty accurate representation. So 1 gram of omega-3 to 3 grams of omega-6. Whereas now we're looking at somewhere in the ballpark of like 1 to 25 to 1 to 50. So it's drastically increased, that ratio. And that ratio is again going to cause things like, especially around neurological inflammation and reduced neurological function, so brain function. So I think we're not eating enough omega-3 for one, and we're eating way too much omega-6, which is mainly going to be coming from these seed oils and ultra processed foods that are generally demonized. And then secondly, when these omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids oxidize, when they're exposed to heat or air, then that's when they can become inflammatory. So I don't know if that answers your question, because I know that was quite a nuanced answer, but it's again coming back to quality. And I think some of the ones we want to watch out for is going to be things like canola oil, things like vegetable oil, which doesn't come from vegetables. It comes from a combination of different seed oils. It's going to be things like soybean oil, safflower oil. You got rapeseed oil, which is another name for canola oil. Canola is just more of the acceptable, like no one wants to eat rapeseed oil, but they'll eat canola oil. So I hope that helps answer your question. And things like, I'm a big fan of things like olive oil. I'm a big fan of things like coconut oil, butter. Again, there's nuance to saturated fat as well, which is what you're going to find there. But I don't think that needs to be demonized as much as it is either. But I just think that people want that black and white answer that all seed oils are bad and all saturated fats are bad. Like, I think that we need to go a bit deeper and think about it from a more nuanced perspective.
A few years ago, I remember, well, actually a long time ago, I probably would have been still at home. So I remember the media really pushing low fat. Would you say stay clear of low fat?
So the thing with that is it depends on the person again. Like, first off, you got to think about digestion. Like, can this person digest fats well? And is there factors in their digestive system that's influencing that? So like particular bacterial imbalances, or maybe they don't have a gallbladder, they have poor bile flow. And then we also have to think about, like, for example, caloric intake. Is the person obese? Do they need to reduce their overall caloric intake? Is that going to actually be helpful for them? Then we need to think about, like, also on the flip side of that, from a fat perspective, like, does this person need fat-soluble vitamins? So fats are obviously important as a macronutrient, but then on a micronutrient level, they're also going to be higher in fat-soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K, which most people are deficient in. So do we want to be increasing that? Because it's not really going to be great to avoid those completely. And yeah, then from obviously a hormonal perspective as well, like, we need dietary fats for the production of sex hormones. So, and then you've got blood sugar management issues as well that fats can be potentially helpful with. So again, comes down to the person. I wouldn't really be leaning towards too much low fat products, because you're going to be missing out on a key micronutrient and nutrients, that key macronutrient and micronutrients you need. However, there is some other considerations there as well. Some people might not be able to tolerate a high fat diet, or they might not have the digestive capacity to do that, or that might not be the most beneficial thing for them for their body composition.
Wow, I feel like I've learned more from you in half an hour than I have from probably 15 years of spending so much time in doctors' getting recommended to see specialists and stuff, and it's like, oh my goodness, wow. It's amazing. It's so good that right now we have access to people like you in this education, because I know me now as a mum, like I know my parents didn't have access to this. Like they had access to the conventional doctor, and that's about it.
Mm. I think the other thing that's important there is I don't pretend that I know everything, and I'm sure that my stance will change on different things. And I hope that I've been kind of clear around the nuance, everything I've said so far, that there's obviously caveats to everything. There's no black and white answer so far. We haven't spoke about any of them though. But also the thing is, like with research and like doctors, for example, generally the education system is around 15 years to potential, or roughly around 15 years, I think it is, behind the current science. So what people are learning in university now is around 15 years behind where the current is, based off research done around 15 years ago. And then we have to think about, and this is definitely not a knock on doctors, but also doctors don't really get educated much around nutrition. So we have to kind of question where we're getting our nutritional information from. And that should also be taken into consideration with social media as well, because like I said, these polarizing opinions usually float to the top. But I believe doctors are generally educated less than 10 hours in their whole degree around nutrition. And then I believe there's almost zero education around natural therapies, like instead of medications. And there's a lot to learn around medicine, so that's understandable. But also that's where I think that combination approach, that synergistic approach, can be really helpful. And then we also have to think about coming back to that delay between the research and the current education. What about these doctors who they may have been a doctor for 20, 30, 40 years. Then how much have they been upskilling around that particular topic in that time as well, and changing with what we've learned? So I think that's one of the benefits potentially to not going through the conventional educational system. It's definitely got its own benefits too. I don't want to, knock on that either. I've been learnt a lot in that system too, but again, there's just some limitations to it. So hopefully that helps people to kind of get a bit of a grasp on that too.
Yeah, no, that's great. So coming back to food and being a mum, or even not even if someone's listening, they're not even a mum, but just trying to understand how to better pick what food. So when tackling a supermarket, how can
Mm.
people know what is good and what to avoid?
Great question. Really, really good question. I got a few videos on Instagram that I go in the supermarket on. Again, like there's always going to be nuance to that. I would say that, so I mean, high level, I understand mums and obviously time limitations and energy constraints and accessibility, but supermarkets probably aren't really going to be the best place to start. So if you have the option to go to local grocers, whether that's farmers markets, whether that's independent stores, whether that's health food shops, even shopping online, especially in Australia, we have a lot of options there. That can sometimes give you a bit more control over, or even going direct to farmers for things like meat and stuff like that is amazing, because that is supporting the people who are doing the work. It's not supporting this duopoly that we have in Australia around our food control. Like the control of our food is all basically coming down to Coles and Woolies, and it's where we're finding a lot of these challenges with pricing and things like that. So I totally get that. It's not always possible, but it's something worth thinking about, because quality matters a lot, and there's not as many options there with the supermarkets. But if you are shopping at a supermarket, the good news is that there are a lot more of these good quality products coming through in Australia. We're super lucky compared to a lot of other countries. The standard advice is think about the outside, right? Like not going so much into the aisles where you're going to come across more processed foods, and stick with the whole foods. Like I said before, the single ingredient foods, it is harder to go wrong there. There is obviously individual things there, like if specific fruits and vegetables and whatnot might trigger people if they do have gut issues. But if we're just talking general health, a lot of the time that's going to be a great place to start, especially if you're very, like, the person who's very kind of baseline with their nutritional knowledge has probably already dropped off this podcast because I got way too technical and went too deep into it. But if you are still listening, that is the best place to start, right? Is going to be just with whole foods. Don't worry so much about organic. Don't worry so much about grass fed. Don't worry so much about these little things we see on social media all the time, and just try and get the ultra processed foods out, and just try and start to learn to cook and make consistency from it. So I don't know if that helps at all, but again, some amounts of ingredients is usually going to be good. Not always though, like there's no kind of hard and fast rule, But I think that that would be a couple of things that I would think about if you can go local, and also if you can stick with the outside, stick with single ingredient foods. Personally, I think a balanced diet, again, this wasn't, no one really wants to talk about balanced like omnivore diet, but a good like 50-50 ratio maybe of like animal based and plant based, and getting that variety there for just a general person would be a great place to start.
That's great to hear. I felt myself softening in my expectations, like, when you don't have access, because we get our organic produce from the markets every Saturday, but if we ran out during the week, like the thought of just popping to Coles, which is easiest for the click and collect where I can drive through, and I'm like, if I just did it, it would be so much easier on me. But I have these expectations that I'm like, well, no, you have to get organic and da 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 da. So just to hear you say that, I could even feel myself softening and being like, oh, just get the strawberries or the berries from Coles, or get the apples or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And that's all we have to remember, is coming back to that conversation. Like, there is optimal and there's things you can do better and you can continue to progress, but you can't be optimal and perfect all the time. And the pressure that you put on yourself to try and do that generally has more of a negative impact on your overall health. If you're constantly stressing about your food, you're constantly thinking you're not doing good enough, you're constantly worried about the negative impact of eating berries that are not organic once might have, then most likely that is creating a very negative relationship with food and with your own health journey. And then secondly, is probably creating more health problems than it actually is helping, because of that top-down approach that I spoke about and the impact that your brain and your nervous system and your emotions has on your physical body.
Yeah, I really want to bring this up because I feel like it's happening so much, and I'm aware that this has been a trait of mine that I've just become aware of, is also how I speak about the food in front of my kids.
Mm.
Because, and I have a friend, I hope she doesn't mind me sharing this. I'll actually ask her for permission. So if I'm sharing this and you can hear it, I've asked her for permission and she's allowed me to speak this story. But she's been brought up with a mum who's a lot like me. Like, everything's really good quality and organic, and goes down different rabbit holes of which is good and which is bad, and speaks about it a lot. And, she now speaks about how as she got older, she became a binge eater because she then would hide behind her mum's back and eat. And she has then have made me realize that that's where I would be leading, and I don't want to raise kids that also look at every food and be like, oh, mum said I
Mm.
can't have this, and we're at a party and mum said I can't have that. And so now I'm having to really take accountability for this and be really careful about how I speak, even just catching up with a friend or talking to podcasts, like making sure I don't have my kids around, because it's like I don't want them to grow up afraid and this fear, because I know I'm in a family, like me and my mum and my brother, we're really close, but we're all really bad at it. Like when we see each other, it's like food, oh, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, this is good. And when I just stopped and realized, not recently, I was like, we have kids around listening to this. Like, this is not healthy.
Yeah, it's so hard too, because it's it's well intentioned, and we also have to be aware, like in the modern world so much has changed with our environment and with our food supply, that we do need to be mindful, and there are a lot of things that we do need to watch out for, and it's good to be aware. But an example that I try and say to some of my clients is that I learn about these things and I'm educated about these things so that I don't eat them, but I'm also educated enough to not fear them when I do. So that's where you've got to understand the nuance and got to become educated, so you can know that if I eat pesticides once, it's probably not good for me, and it's probably better for me to try and avoid these when I can. But on the flip side of that, if I do have them, then it's not going to kill me. And it's an accumulation of things over time. And that is very, very hard for a lot of people. It's very hard to not have that black and white mentality. But I think that that is usually the sweet spot. And again, there's going to be a spectrum. So, for example, someone who's super passionate, I'll just take myself for an example versus you. Like, I'm super passionate about health. I've got a partner, but I don't have any kids. Like, I have the freedom to do these kind of things. Like, I'm happy to invest whatever I can into living a healthier lifestyle, and then also learning about these things to educate my clients. But I'm not going to be the same as you, right? Like, you're going to have other pulls on your time, and especially mums listening to this. Like, I have so much respect and appreciation for the mums who want to help their kids as best as they can and set them up. But again, you have to also understand that what you can do and what's realistic for you is going to be very different to what a random health influencer on social media or even a doctor is going to do. Yeah. So you have to know yourself. And it's hard, because that again comes down to that nuance. But again, I think that is going to be the healthiest approach in the long term.
Yeah, I'm feeling that too. Have you seen a link between childhood trauma, stored emotions, and gut issues?
Yeah, definitely. Um, I would say that trauma and obviously chronic stress, but a lot of the time these stress patterns can come from childhood things that happened anyway, would be one of the most common threads between a lot of the people that I work with. It's not the only thing. Like there's definitely other factors. Like you could have an infection where you get exposed to many rounds of antibiotics, or you could have not been aware, not known better, and partied a lot with alcohol and recreational drugs through your younger years. There's a dozen examples you could think of ways you could end up with gut issues without trauma. However, I would say that it's a lot more common than what people realize. And I had a call with someone recently where she was telling me about her relationship with food, and she was telling me about her that she mentioned some past trauma, childhood trauma, adulthood trauma. And I said, have you considered that having an impact on your gut health? And she said, no. And like that's relatively normal to people not understand that there is that two-way connection. And this is where that hierarchy comes in, and that two-way relationship and addressing both of them is important. But to answer your question in a direct way, definitely there is a link for sure.
Yeah, cool. I won't get into it now, but I have yeah, an incredible journey in my own life where yeah, just being diagnosed with IBS from a young age and I was constantly in the doctors and then I went down the holistic approach when I probably turned about 21 and when I was about 24 I was seeing what was it called? Oh no, what is it called? Where they flush your bowels out?
Yeah, colonic.
Colonic. I was going into colonics and the lady said to me, she was like, everything seems so fine. Like, is there any chance like there's something that happened in your childhood that's sitting in your gut? Anyway, long story short, I actually went and I had a life coach a few years later and I ended up doing a trauma release session under psilocybin and she went over my gut and had been laughing and crying and happy, so happy, and then she went over my gut. Sorry, not crying, laughing. And then when she went over my gut, it was like all of these emotions came out. And since that point forward, my gut has never been better. However, I'm still very passionate and health and good ingredients and stuff has become my whole life. Like I really value it. But that was when the trajectory of it really changed. It was quite incredible. Do you think people can create quite an identity around their health issues?
A great question. And yeah, absolutely. I think if not more than like a lot of things. Like again, like if we use diets, for example, a lot of people identify with their diets more than they believe, and that makes it very hard to change. So, for example, vegan and carnivore, obviously the two extensive extremes with diets, usually a lot of time it becomes part of their identity. And I see this a lot with health issues as well, gut issues specifically, and a big part of it can be from diagnoses, from being what you've been told in the past by certain people. And then other health challenges as well, right? Like, I was actually on a podcast recently and it's talking about endometriosis being one of the ones that I come across the most, where there's a huge identity part of it as well. And there's benefits to that, again, with connection and things, but there's also once it becomes part of your identity, it's even harder to let go of. And especially it's been such a big part of your life for so long. And it's almost coming back to what we were talking about before. Like when you become so identified with this physical health ailment, it then hyper focuses you on that and then kind of puts the blinders on being aware of other things. So what caused that, right? Let's just use, if we used endometriosis for an example, probably not the best example. If we maybe use like something like SIBO as an example, which is a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, you become so identified with that and trying to address that and Googling that and looking for different people to help you with that, that you don't think about what actually caused that and was there an emotional component to it? Is there a lifestyle component to it? So yeah, I think 100% people can definitely become identified with their health challenges or ailments or symptoms, and that just makes it tenfold harder to get better in the long run.
I read this years ago and I've tried to practice it every day since because I've been diagnosed with quite a few different labels. That even just changing your wording, like rather than like I have or I've got, it's like I'm healing from. And so you're already taking that mindset to like it's like I'm moving away from that now, and this is my way forward. Because when you're constantly, you become in this habit of like, I have this, and it becomes kind of, I see it a lot in society, a bit of an excuse to not
Mm.
doing a bit more of the harder work. But yeah, that's what I definitely try. No one will ever hear me say, oh, I have IBS or I have polycystic ovaries, because I'm like, years ago I had to be like, I had to stop identifying with it and go, no, I need to move on. And I'm not taking that away from whoever has that right now and is struggling with the challenges of healing from it. I'm not saying that at all, but that reading that, and for me it was a huge shift in healing, just by changing the mindset and how I worded that around it.
Massive. I love that you said that. I think you said that really well, and I totally agree.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. So pharmaceutical drugs, I really wanted to more touch on antibiotics because you do talk about antibiotics quite a lot.
Mm.
But if there's any more, I'd love to hear. So what's good and what's bad?
Oh, again, like we don't want to classify things so much as good and bad
And
because
what? Mm-hmm.
exactly, and it depends on the person, right? Like it's the a lot of the time it's the duration of time, it's going to be the amount, like the frequency. So like for example, taking a painkiller once isn't going to destroy your gut, but taking a painkiller like ibuprofen, like Advil every single day, multiple times, is it going to accumulate over time and cause some damage? Antibiotics. I'm not trying to dissuade people from taking antibiotics because they can save lives. And if someone avoids them and ends up dying, that would be a huge mistake, right? It's just about if you're taking them frequently for something that it's not addressing the root cause, then essentially it could be significantly damaging your gut. So there's a lot of nuance to that, right? If you have a disease already, then that may not be potentially reversible or fully supportable without medical intervention, then I'm not bashing on that in any way. Like that is extremely important for people to understand that there are cases where these are needed. Like we should be very grateful for medicine in a lot of ways, but it's just understanding the risks, the trade-offs, and are there any alternatives? And I think a lot of people just don't get advised onto that, or they don't understand the risks. They don't understand, like for me with antidepressants, for example, I was told that it would just be for 6 months and then come off them and that'd be fine, be fixed. But obviously, I was on them for 3 years. That conversation never came up naturally that I should come off them. I had to kind of force that. I also didn't really understand the long-term effects. There was never a conversation around potential withdrawals. This is obviously the same with the oral contraceptive pill, like being put on this for, from such a young age. Like it's got its place, but are you honestly having that conversation around the potential risks? I don't think so. So I think that any drug can potentially be bad, right? In the long term, but that doesn't mean that I'm against all drugs and no one should take them. It's just understanding. And for me, it's been eye-opening coming into the functional medicine world because I never really questioned any of this, right? I never knew that there would be, potential supplemental alternatives that may compare with pharmaceutical drugs in some cases. I never knew that there might be other factors or root causes driving a condition that meant that it wasn't a lifelong diagnosis. It was just a presentation of symptoms. There could be things I could do to support it. So I feel like I'm speaking so much in like frameworks and fundamentals rather than giving people the specifics around certain things.
It's
But
good.
like I touched on NSAIDs. So NSAIDs are like non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. That's things like Nurofen, Advil, naproxen. Like these drugs can definitely cause like significant damage to the mucosa in the stomach and the small intestine. So cause like ulcers and perforations, potentially bleeding, intestinal permeability, enhance the gut microbiome. So just as this is an example, because a lot of women might take this, either weekly for a headache, or they might take it a lot monthly for period pain. Like once off isn't going to be too much of a problem, but if you do that every month for multiple years or decades, then it might accumulate into causing some issues. And the biggest problem with medications is that it will treat the symptom, right? It'll put the band-aid on the symptom, it'll put the fire out. But a great analogy that I once heard is taking a medication for a symptom is sort of like putting like a bit of duct tape over the check engine light, right? So your car check engine light's on, put the tape over it, you can't see it anymore, but the problem's still there. It's just getting worse. It's just a matter of time. And this is where over time, you don't check that engine for long enough, it's going to break down. That's when you get a real presentation of a serious health problem. You're like, oh, but I didn't do anything. I didn't change anything. Yeah, but you were doing the wrong thing for so long that eventually the chain's going to break. So you got to look into, for example, with antidepressants. That is, like I said, that can be a tool to get you to where you need to go. But can we go a bit deeper and see, is there potentially a reason why you're depressed? Like for me, like I obviously had no awareness around my emotions. I was stressed. My lifestyle was terrible. Like I was essentially taking amphetamines every day, which was leading me to not sleep and be coming down the next day. I was partying every weekend, drugs and alcohol. Like you can see why I'd be depressed. So antidepressant. And then I went on that same lifestyle for the next 3 years, just taking antidepressant to basically numb it. And there's so many examples of that we could give around medication use being an easy, quick fix that'll help with the symptom. But we also wanted to think about the long-term ramifications of the drug itself and also of what happens when you don't address the thing that is causing the symptoms, the root cause per se.
Something else you shared not long ago, which I thought that antibiotics, it takes 2 years for antibiotics to heal your gut, but you actually shared it takes up to 4 years.
Yeah. So there was one study that did show that some strains I think the study length was actually 4 years. And by the end of that time, there was some strains that hadn't come back to normal since the use of antibiotics. So is it 4 years? Is it permanent? There is some evidence to suggest that some strains are more sensitive and they'll be wiped out permanently. So we want to have around, and again, this is not me trying to demonize antibiotics because I've done them. I had to do them once last year, once the year before that, and for infections that I tried to treat naturally and couldn't. And there's much more scenarios where more significant life-threatening infections. So if you need antibiotics, don't not take them. Do not be afraid of the long-term effects, because the short-term effect could be that you die or that you lose a limb or you're permanently injured from not using them. So that's important to understand. But it can. So a lot of the effects come back. And again, it's a spectrum, right? So some of the strains will come back within, a few weeks. A lot of them normalize within 3 months. And then there are, some strains that will take 2 years, and then obviously some that may never come back. So we do want to be very careful around that. The other thing to remember is that a lot of these studies, they're not really looking at interventions. So they're not necessarily using a lot of things to offset that damage. So that's where I've kind of put the information around there, that there are also compounds and things you can do that will offset some of that damage and reduce the impact that it'll have on the microbiome, reduce the long-term side effects, and reduce the symptoms. And I think if we just do that, because I know that for me, like last time I was prescribed antibiotics, I was given this very broad spectrum, strong antibiotic, and then that was it. And then I went to Chemist Warehouse after that, and I just wanted to have a look, and I got a few different things that I knew would actually help with offsetting the damage and feeling okay. So I think that education wasn't given to me. I've obviously had to look and seek that out myself. You won't really find that in the medical model very much. But if we have that information, then again, we can take antibiotics, not without thinking about it first, but without as much damage.
Yeah, cool, amazing. And I know that you share a lot of information. So if anyone's listening and you want to go, okay, well, what do I get? Just we'll share your details later and jump on, because you have created so much content around how to support yourself if you need to take antibiotics or any other drug, really.
Yeah, and all I just say is to people is just ask whether or not you really do need it, because we get prescribed them. I've been prescribed them before for a virus, so that's going to be completely useless. That actually led to me having an allergic reaction. So we want to know that it's actually because antibiotics are antibacterial, right? They're treating bacteria. They don't treat viruses. So if you're taking that, all risk, no reward. You're not going to have any benefit from that. And then secondly, is there anything else, like, will this infection, so I know so many people who take antibiotics just for like getting sick. I used to have personal training clients who would take it when they would get just run down, like a cold, like just even things prophylactically, you would take it in case you got an infection. Like we're going to kind of question that a little bit, because it's not like you just take it and that's it, right? Like there's those long-term effects. So I just get people to kind of think about that and think about whether you not really need it, because also the overuse of antibiotics and the misuse of antibiotics is leading to antibiotic resistance, which is essentially a threat to human life. Like it's essentially a threat to humanity, because, if antibiotics stop working on specific bacteria, and we're susceptible to those bacteria being 100% fatality rates.
So have you found a link between COVID times and a weakened immune system?
Yeah, I would say it's a tricky one to answer specifically, because first off, I was not really as much into the space prior to COVID as I am now. but secondly, there can be a lot of contributing factors. So again, we first off have like some of the around COVID, for example, there was a lot of fear, there was a lot of isolation. There was also some of the recommendations around, hand sanitization, staying inside, like all these things can have a negative impact on health, especially the psychological side of it, the isolation and the fear and the news and things. Then you've got, I guess coming on from that, there was benefits that on the side. So a lot of people did get more aware around their health and focused on it and kind of had less stress from work and things. So there's that. But then obviously we have like, the disease, it's the virus itself. And then we also have the vaccines, the effects of those, and like potentially, long-term ramifications from those. So just from my perspective, and again, I think we see these things kind of manifest over a longer period of time as well. So a lot of the time we can't specifically connect the impacts of like COVID and the vaccines, for example, onto these health issues that come up later on. But there is, like, without going into it too much, there is some evidence around COVID, the spike protein, the gut lining, beneficial bacteria, even long COVID has links to the gut microbiome. So I think it's worth people looking into. And then obviously the gut has such a huge impact on the immune system too. People would have heard that around 70% of the body's immune cells are within the gut. Just from my anecdotal experience, I have seen it's a lot of people getting more sick more often, and then obviously longer term gut issues definitely there as well. But that's just my anecdotal at this point.
Amazing. Yeah, it's I've wondered too. There are a few trends going around at the moment. Can you help us understand what's good and bad, starting off with parasite detoxes?
I've talked about this a couple of times. I think there's a lot of nuance to this as well. So why do people get better when they do parasite detoxes? So some people do have parasites, but they're probably less common than what people actually think. And especially there's research to show that parasites can be symbiotic in the microbiome. So you can have parasites, they're not necessarily going to be asymptomatic or causing damage to your health. That's not always the case. There can be as well. But a lot of time with these parasite cleanses or detoxes, like the recommendations are cut out all these inflammatory foods, processed foods. They're going to be drink more water, maybe drink bone broth, maybe, you're making a conscious effort to your health. Almost anything you do consciously to try and change your health, whether that's carnivore diet, vegan diet, parasite cleanse, juice detox, whatever it is, will help short term because you're cutting out a lot of things that are causing problems and you're just focusing on improving your health. But realistically, I don't think that these parasite cleanses and detoxes are a good road for most people to go down. If it helps you in the short term, fine, but understand that it's first and foremost not that likely that it is parasites that you have or that are causing your problems. Secondly, it's even less likely that it's only parasites that is causing your problems, right? So you may have parasites, but you may also have co-infections. So you may also have low beneficial bacteria, H. pylori, candida, SIBO, leaky gut. Again, are all those things going to be rectified? Probably not. And then thirdly, you have to be mindful of the potential collateral damage. So some of these parasite cleansers are quite potent and you could be wiping out some of your beneficial bacteria and causing dysbiosis by doing that. So I think it's just worth being mindful of that. The reality is that short-term fixes with gut health are almost destined not to work because right back at the start, I told you how, it's a process and there's a lot of different elements to it. But if it helps you feel better in the short term, fine, but just understand that it's probably not going to be the fix that you're looking for and there are risks.
What about coffee enemas?
Again, coffee enemas, kind of similar. It's not really something I've looked into all that much, but obviously similar to colonics, yeah, where you are kind of having that detox, you're removing things from the large intestine. But again, like I said earlier, there's different areas in the gastrointestinal tract. So you don't just have the large intestine, you also have the small intestine, which is not going to be affected by colonics and enemas, the stomach, the gut lining. So it might help in the short term. However, it's probably not going to be a root cause solution. And that's the thing I say to clients with colonics specifically is like, they can be helpful in some respects. They can help you feel better. There are some benefits to it, but there are also some risks around the microbiome potentially. But then also it's just not going to be addressing everything, right? There's other elements you got to think about. And especially if you don't make lifestyle change, like you're just going to, even if it did fix everything, would it, you would just end up being back in the same place eventually anyway, without that long-term habits and lifestyle and education and knowledge.
Should we be avoiding tap water? And if so, coming back to the trends, I'm seeing a lot of these different water machines.
You don't sell them, do you?
No, I do not.
Cool. Just wanted to check that first. Um, So obviously this is Kangen water. This is like multi-level marketing, right? I'm not going to use the P word, but obviously you have to take things with a grain of salt if someone is financially incentivized to recommend it. Now, I'm not against them, but we have to understand that my belief around this is that why do these companies like Kangen lean on multi-level marketing? It's so that the marketers themselves, the people kind of down the pyramid, no, the down the chain a little bit, can make claims. They're not specifically employees, so they can say things about that without the company being held liable. And then also, someone's got to be making money, and who's paying for that? It's going to be the consumer. So you might be paying multiple thousands for a water filter that doesn't really have any good evidence behind it and is potentially no better than $100, $500 even water filter, right? So I think it's a no-brainer to filter our tap water because it's cheap and it's easy. I'm not saying drinking a cup of tap water is going to kill you, but you just may as well, right? Because we know that there's chlorine, we know that there's fluoride, there's most likely going to be traces of heavy metals, there's most likely going to be traces potentially of pharmaceuticals, and obviously PFAs, so like things that are endocrine disruptors. So it makes sense because you can get a good quality water filter for $100, and then that's going to filter a majority of that. So yes, I think we should filter our tap water if you can, but if you can't, don't stress. But it's a good first step, low investment that will have a good long-term health benefit.
Amazing. Coming to like business and a you and a me, how can we create better healthy habits when we do spend a lot of our time behind a screen?
That's a great question because I think, like for me, that's a huge challenge, and I know that as so many people work from home or they work online, like it does become almost a paradox, especially when I'm a health coach or other coaches, for example, personal trainers who are now working online, but their whole thing is to move and walk more. Um, it is something worth considering. So I'm a big fan of breaks, first off, if you can. So like a 5-minute break every hour. So what I try and do is I just try and go out and go barefoot, get some sunlight. I'll do some light movement, like some squats, maybe some lunges, loosen up the hips, get sun, take my eyes away from the screen. So if you can do that, that's awesome. Standing desk, I'm a big fan of like one-off purchases that are just going to continue to give. Like supplements are fine, but again, you got to continue to purchase them. Whereas a standing desk, you purchase that once, and then you're going to get so much more time standing, which is going to help with blood sugar, and even mental clarity. Like I'm standing right now because it helps kind of with your tonality and activating different areas of your brain. So breaks is awesome. You can also, we got standing desk. On top of that, you can do walking. You've got those walking pads, but they're depending on kind of what kind of work you do. Natural light is a huge one as well. So trying not to have the overhead artificial lights on all the time, and try and have either, if you can, have the windows open. That's one decent way, or even better would be actually working outside or open air. So you're getting the full spectrum of natural light. That's a huge one. I think they're probably the biggest ones. Yeah, it's having a little bit of movement. It's broken up throughout the day rather than just having that one block of working out. And secondly, getting as much natural light exposure as possible and not sitting under artificial blue light all throughout the day, all hours. That can massively help. And then if you do work late at night, potentially investing into like some red lens blue blocking glasses. You don't need them throughout the day, but after sunset, that can be helpful. And then last but not least, like obviously EMF exposure could be possibly a factor too. So first off, just turning your Wi-Fi off at night. If you can use corded things, like if you use a corded keyboard, don't use your laptop when it's plugged in, try and use like corded headphones. You can just kind of limit these things a little bit rather than have that huge amount of exposure that's not really getting you any benefit.
I really
Um,
like that you touched on that.
they're probably key ones. I don't know. Did any you think I missed that?
Nah, nah, I don't think so. Well, actually, coming back to sunlight, what's your take on sunscreen? When and when not to use?
Yeah. So I think that there's again nuance to this, right? So obviously, if someone already like potentially has precancerous cells, then it might be beneficial there. But there's so much to unpack here when it comes to sunscreen and when it comes to skin cancer and metabolic health and circadian health. So overall, I think that sunscreen isn't really going to be the best answer for most people, because obviously it may have carcinogenic and endocrine disrupting effects like standard conventional sunscreen. But then even if we're using low tox sunscreen, then like things like zinc oxide, you're going to be blocking out the sun anyway, right? So you're not going to absorb vitamin D. If you're covering your whole body with it, you're not going to be getting any of the kind of UV that's going to help with the, metabolic health, mitochondrial health, circadian health, and again, vitamin D. So I think that it comes down to a few factors. It comes to probably a bit too much to go into right now, but like making sure you're getting exposure to all spectrums of light. So that's morning sunlight, midday sunlight, but not burning, and then evening, like afternoon, late day sunlight as well. That's going to help align the circadian rhythm. About uh, intelligent exposure, so consistent exposure daily rather than getting burnt on the weekend or on a holiday and then not getting any sun at all. Obviously, maintaining vitamin D status can be protective. Not getting too much blue light at night, that obviously is something you can mitigate pretty well. So there's just so much nuance to sun exposure and to skin cancer potentially as well that we want to think about. And I think that almost coming back to a conversation with like, medications and pills for ills, like sunscreen's almost like a band-aid approach. But yeah, natural options are better, but overall, I think we need to really think about sun exposure in a holistic way. And it's not just sun exposure and sunburning, it's light exposure as a whole, artificial light and sunlight, red light, all these different kind of things.
Amazing. You word your answers so well.
You're
I can tell,
right.
like when you're someone's been like an influencer on social media for so long, you have to become so good with your words because otherwise you get so attacked with haters.
Yeah, 100%. That is extremely true. And I also think that, like, I watch a lot of content on social media as well, and I just try to be better. Like, I think that we can set the bar higher. I'm not saying that I am better, I'm just aspiring to be better. And, try to, make sure that my answers are kind of serving the people, the population, like, as best possible rather than just, have polarizing opinions that don't have any kind of scientific backing, that are black and white, because I think these kind of things are what's destroying the health of people and also the mental health as well around health and their relationship with health.
Yeah, definitely. What effects does Botox have on gut health?
You just made a list of like all the controversial things, didn't you? And just all the things that get me kind of
Sure
fired up.
did.
How can I get Charlie in trouble? No, so again, this is a very controversial topic, and I think like one thing I'll say before I get into it is I'm not trying to shame anyone. I'm not trying to pass judgment onto anyone, and everyone has the right to do whatever they would like with their body. And I think all I'm kind of advocating for is education and informed consent and intelligent decision making, because I don't think that this really gets spoken about. I think we can speak about the other side to things. And if you choose to know the health consequences and then still choose to do that, that's completely your prerogative. So if anyone does get Botox listening to this, then I don't have any judgment around that. But if you haven't been educated and you've only just taken the effects at face value from the people who are, essentially giving it to you, like they're prescribing it, what would be the word for it? They'd be the ones selling it essentially, right? Anyway, so just wanted to, disclaimer there. But so Botox is a neurotoxin. It's derived from a bacteria, and essentially what it does, it paralyzes the muscle. So this is how it kind of stops aging. Yeah, and it does that by blocking acetylcholine. And acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter that is needed for muscle contractions. Yeah, so the muscle can't contract anymore. Now, it's quite controversial whether or not Botox has any systemic effects. So a lot of people will say that it's local only, right? So like you inject it into the forehead, then it's only going to stay local to the forehead. But most things don't necessarily, that's not necessarily the case. There's pretty limited evidence to say that it is definitely systemic. But if it was, for example, and there is a little bit of evidence to suggest that it might be, and this stuff's pretty hard to come across as well, because we have to kind of think about who's funding what studies and also what studies want to be kind of widely available. But if it was to be systemic, then blocking acetylcholine would be extremely detrimental for the parasympathetic nervous system and the vagus nerve, because the vagus nerve, acetylcholine is potentially the most important neurotransmitter to help with the function of that, so that gut to brain connection. So I'm concerned about that a little bit. For mums, I think a huge one to think about is, again, no shame here, but you are blocking your body, you're blocking your facial muscles from being able to contract. And this is extremely important for babies in understanding the emotions of their parents, who is the most important thing to them. So I probably haven't worded that as well as what someone else could, but do you really want to be stopping, like they can't understand what you're saying. So they're just reading your facial expressions. So if you can't express your facial through facial, you can't move your facial muscles, you can't move your face basically, then that's making it very hard for them. Then there's anecdotal reports around, like, obviously depersonalization and lack of empathy, so not being able to feel that. Some people even admit to that on my post when I talk about Botox, that they enjoy that effect, that they can't feel empathy for other people because they're too empathetic. So that's an interesting perspective, but I don't know if I would necessarily want to put that effect onto myself. And then the last thing I would think about with Botox is the impact that it has on the lymphatic system. So the lymphatic system is essentially one of the systems within the body that helps us essentially remove toxins, right? It kind of works with the circulatory system to remove things from the body that doesn't really want to be there. It's like the sewerage system essentially of the body. There's a lymphatic system. So with the blood has a heart, yeah? The heart pumps blood around the body, and that's how it moves things around. The lymphatic system doesn't have a heart. It relies on muscular contractions to move things around. So muscles need to be able to contract to move lymph around the system and move these things and help detoxify them. So if you can't contract your muscles in your face, that's going to have a really negative impact on the lymphatic system, essentially stopping it from being able to work. And then that's essentially going to lead to things like premature aging and inflammation and puffiness within the face. So I think that's a huge thing. That's where I said that Botox can be causing like premature aging, along with potentially having some pretty serious negative health side effects. So they're the key. Oh, and then also there's the impact that Botox may have on the thyroid too. In reducing thyroid function, increasing the risk of miscarriage. There's a couple other studies that I saw around Botox and thyroid health and fertility and hormonal health. So just some things worth looking into. Obviously, no one's recommending Botox during pregnancy. However, this is something to be mindful of. So I think I've covered the main things there to think about. I'd also just think about, like, why do you feel like you need that? Like, sometimes it comes back to like self-worth and self-image. And obviously, I'm not saying this is every individual's problem, like this is a societal problem. But then also, is there things you could do potentially to support like your appearance and your skin that's actually going to be a net positive? So, for example, things like collagen, things like red light, things like nutrient availability, so getting enough nutrients, obviously inflammation, obviously the products that you put on your skin. So all those things play a role. And then again, so Botox is just coming back to like, and lymphatic health, like you've seen people probably use the gua sha, I think you pronounce it, like that's helping with lymph. Because the thing I was going to say with the lymph is that it's above, I believe it's 1/3 potentially of all the lymphatic system is above the shoulder. So it's it's a high percentage of the lymphatic system, majority of it, right, is above the head. And that's because obviously we're trying to remove so much of this stuff from the brain area, and then it's all throughout the body as well. So that's the main area that Botox is getting injected right into the face. So that's a long-winded answer, I know. And there's nuance to that. I'm not saying it's set in stone, but it's just a question you should ask yourself and something you might be worth looking into before you do go down that path. Because there's also, aside from research, there's a lot of anecdotal reports around negative side effects and negative outcomes, essentially reactions to Botox use. That's pretty severe. And obviously there's always going to be outliers, but it's just, are you wanting to take that risk? Because there's a huge amount of people that are totally fine from taking it in the short term, for sure. But there is also a risk of having significant side effects as well.
Yeah. Wow, so it's definitely bring up the fertility. I didn't actually realize that it has been linked to fertility issues, and I think with essentially we do live in a world right now where we are dodging toxins and chemicals and stuff. So I guess for somebody who lives quite like a clean life and that might just be their one thing. Like I'm still thinking, even though I like to think I now like would have informed consent. I've kind of thought like if I were to do it again, I would do it after kids, after breastfeeding, after having babies, after being pregnant and stuff. But yeah, going into it then. But I guess like with the average person who may live more of a toxic lifestyle, that could tip them over the edge, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't want to create fear, like as I said before, with everything, like, um, it's not set in stone, and it's going to be the amount that you use it and the frequency. And as you said, like the tipping point, right? It can just be this accumulation. And I think what I find hard for myself is like I do see a lot of influencers and personalities in the health and wellness space who are preaching. This is what kind of grinds my gears a little bit, is these women. And it's women, it's not only women, but in like who do this kind of thing, but women in general, because that's going to be the people who are getting like breast implants, lip filler, Botox. Again, I know it's hard coming from a male, like to have this perspective, but to go into the supermarket and say to people, never eat blueberries because blueberries get this specific uh, pesticide, for example, like create all these fear mongering around all these different low tox products and things like that. Yet they have breast implants, lip filler, and Botox. That frustrates me a little bit because and it's totally fine if you're going to be transparent about that. If you're transparently using like these things, and then also trying to help educate people, I have a little bit more respect for that because again, it's your prerogative. But I don't think that you should have the right to preach a specific create fear around other things that probably are quite insignificant compared to Botox, breast implants, lip filler, Ozempic, but and not speak openly about the fact that you use those things. Does that make sense? Like what I just
Yeah.
said?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
cool. Just want to
Let's
make
move
sure
on.
that I was clear with it because, like, again, I don't want to. I'm not trying to hate. I'm not trying to create fear. I'm not trying to pass judgment. But that's just, and that was not directed at you at all by any means. It was more as a generalization.
Yeah, I didn't take it as an
Okay,
offense
cool,
whatsoever.
cool,
Um, okay, so we've got some community questions for you, only a
cool,
few.
beautiful.
Someone said, is smelly farts related to what we are eating and what's happening in the gut?
Yeah, so it can be both, right? It can be a sign of underlying issues around the gut with fermentation. It's going to get a little bit technical, but certain foods are going to be more susceptible to this. I don't know if people have heard of like the low FODMAP diet, which is low fermentable carbohydrates, specific types of carbohydrates that ferment more and will create gases that lead to flatulence and lead to bloating and potentially constipation. So reducing those can help with that. It's not a long-term fix, but it's a good way to know if you do have bacterial problems, if you are responding to those kind of things. There's other factors too, yeah, like just even if you have great gut health, if you go and eat a huge amount of beans and raw vegetables and stuff like that, most likely you're going to get some flatulence. Sometimes, most of the time, to be honest, it's going to point towards something going on in the gut or your diet. But I would think that's relatively, yeah, clear for most people. But again, there's multiple reasons why you could have that as well.
Does poor health during pregnancy lead to an unhealthy baby?
Um, That's a really, really good question. I'm a big fan. Like I have a lot of respect for women who like plan to get pregnant, or when they do fall pregnant, they start to work on their health really. They start to focus on that a lot because to set their baby up. I think that's amazing. Um, Poor health during pregnancy. I mean, some decisions that you make during pregnancy could definitely impact the baby. And then from a gut health perspective, if you do have your baby born naturally, so yeah, natural birth, the baby's generally going to inherit the mother's microbiome because when it passes through the vaginal canal and it's born, the vaginal microbiome, the collection of bacteria within the vagina, is going to inoculate the baby's, essentially start that baby's microbiome off. So your gut health does kind of pass on. Your baby does kind of inherit their gut health from their mother. Not the only thing, but it's one factor. So if you can improve the diversity of your gut microbiome and your vaginal microbiome in turn, that will help with your baby's health. And that's been shown to have positive health outcomes for babies who are born naturally versus cesarean. But again, not trying to knock on cesareans. If you need to get one for whatever reason, then that is totally okay. There's no judgment there. It's just you do what's in your control and what you can. So yeah, it definitely can, But again, you just got to do the best that you possibly can as well. And I think that the bigger thing would be the emotional aspect of it as well. And it's not really my massive specialty area of expertise, like, fertility and pregnancy and postpartum. But the more you can do to support your own health, and I think gut health during during and post pregnancy, then it is going to have knock-on benefits to your baby for sure.
Amazing. Last question. Pre, pro, and postbiotic. Do we need pathology done beforehand?
Yes and no. You can definitely personalize it based off exactly what you find is going on. So, in some cases, certain probiotics will exacerbate symptoms, or at least they won't be the best choice because they won't be the most beneficial. So you might spend $100 on a probiotic that might be not the best one. You could do a better one if you knew exactly what was going on within your gut. However, like if you can tolerate, what was it? Prebiotics, postbiotics, did they say?
Pre, pro, and post biotic.
Pre-pro. Yeah, cool. So prebiotics, just to differentiate, prebiotics are going to feed beneficial bacteria. Yeah. So the beneficial bacteria that you already have, prebiotics are like food for that to help that proliferate. So that would be something like, for example, you've got fibers, you've got things like onion, things like garlic, these high FODMAP foods, they are fermentable prebiotic foods. Then you've got probiotics, which are actual strains of bacteria, right? So they're live bacteria that can then come through the gut microbiome, the gastrointestinal system, and then have like an effect. Yeah, whether it's anti-inflammatory effect, whether it modulates the microbiome. They don't really colonize the gut that much. They don't, like the probiotics you take don't actually then go on to live in your gut. They pass through and they have their effects while they do that. And then you've got postbiotics, which is going to be essentially, these are going to be produced by probiotics, right? So these are going to be produced by bacteria. So this is things like short chain fatty acids like butyrate that can then have their own effect, whether that be anti-inflammatory or helping with nutrient absorption, things like that. So you can definitely personalize it based on the person. And if you do have a positive or negative reaction, it could be like, if you have a negative reaction especially, it could be because that wasn't the right one for you. But there are going to be some safeguard things you can do as well. Like, for example, fermented foods for most people, gradually building that up. Things like partially hydrolyzed guar gum as a fiber, prebiotic fiber that can help feed beneficial bacteria. But I think, as with anything, start with food. And from a more supplemental perspective, I do usually recommend pathology testing to personalize that, just because it's going to be a bit more specific and the costs can definitely accumulate if you are just guessing.
Amazing. All right. I know how much you love to rapid fire. So I'm going to ask you a series of questions.
Let's go.
And I want you to answer with one word answers only.
Ooh, okay.
You ready?
Yep.
Number one supplement that everybody needs daily.
Magnesium.
Number one pharmaceutical drug to avoid.
It depends. That's 2 words.
Depends. Best cooking oil.
Ghee.
Worst cooking oil.
Canola oil.
Choose on or off.
Off.
Sun or no sun.
Sun.
Best supplement for depression.
Saffron.
Anxiety.
L-theanine.
Knee.
This is so hard because there's multiple, but overall, like all of these are so hard. So please don't take this as the only answer, but I would say overall, I would personally probably start with cod liver oil.
Constipation.
Magnesium.
Cold and flu.
Colostrum.
UTI.
D-mannose.
And lastly, if there was one food you had to eat for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Steak.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, Charlie. Where can everybody find you, and what are your offerings to the community?
You can find me on Holistic Gut Health. That's my Instagram, at Holistic Gut Health. That's going to be the best place to find me. We have a few different things. We have a lot of free resources. I try and help as many people as I can for free. We have a community called the Gut Health Hub, which is a membership site that gives you access to everything that you need to help with your gut journey. And we also do personalized protocols using blood analysis and stool analysis to know exactly what's going on and what you need to do from an individualized perspective.
Awesome. I'll get all your details from you and I'll add it all in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on.
I appreciate you having me. I appreciate it. It was a great conversation. Yeah, thank you again.